Senator John McCain was speaking to CNN just moments ago, elaborating on the
Were you addressing the president or Bannon or the group in total?
I think that what is clear is what I was talking about as an environment here of non-productivity, of a reversion to the attitude of the 30s, which was one of the major reasons why we fought World War II.
And then with regard to, and I'm reluctant to bring it up, sir, but I feel I need to, with regard to what the president has said about General Kelly and his son, and President Obama not addressing, is this an appropriate place for the president to be making comments? You've served in the armed forces.
Frankly, I don't know what to think about that. I think that our first objective has to be to honor the service and sacrifice of these young people who have given their lives.
I want to turn now to CNN presidential historians Tim Naftali and Douglas Brinkley, who is a history professor at Rice University. So, Doug, you're looking at this escalating war of words between Senator McCain and President Trump. What do you make of it?
That John McCain was very brave to give that dinner address under the auspices of liberty and warn us basically about our country being taken over by half-baked nationalist ideas, that our whole sense of global promotion of our global ideals is getting corroded. It's under siege. He's an old-time, big pro-NATO Atlanticist, John McCain, and he sees our foreign policy acting in a very fickle and confused way right now. He felt he had a public service to speak up. He did. It reminded me of Eisenhower's farewell address in the sense that he's really warning the country to beware of having your government behave in a reprehensible right-wing nationalistic manner.
Tim, one of the points he made was he was saying, don't turn away from the world that you helped organize. He said that in his speech. And here he was asked to talk about really this return, as he put it here, the non-productivity of a version of the attitude of the 30s, that sort of turning into oneself as a country, which he said precipitated World War II. That's a big warning.
Well, for John, remember that John McCain not only has an unbelievably beautiful and honorable personal biography, but he comes from a family of service. And in his speech last night, he talked about how he remembered Pearl Harbor and his father
leaving that day, he said.
So for him,
service.
He has a personal family connection to internationalism, to the fact that America in the 1930s let the world fall apart, didn't participate, didn't add its voice as it could have. That was the lesson his generation and his father's generation learned, which is when you leave things alone and America doesn't take its place among the great powers, the world gets into trouble. And he's saying, remember that. And now it's so selfish of a new generation of Americans, of American firsters, to have forgotten the lessons learned by his father and by his generation. And that's what he's speaking up about.
So he's essentially saying that he believes this is a rebuke of American excellence as he sees it.
Well, no, it's a rebuke of American first. I mean, actually, the whole title. That was the title used by isolationists in the 1930s through Pearl Harbor. They disappeared after Pearl Harbor for obvious reasons. And it's come back. And he's saying, don't forget the reasons why America began to participate internationally. It wasn't because we were seeking control of the world. It was because the world needed us and we met the call. That's what it was about.
Doug, what do you think?
Well, I think any U.S. president since FDR would have embraced John McCain's words and said, right on. You're preaching to the American choir. However, Donald Trump's a different animal. And then he took offense to the fact that Donald Trump was intimating that perhaps Trumpians are somehow creating a half-baked nationalism, an isolationism, playing ostrich. That's going to be gravely dangerous for future generations to come. He felt at this point he's fighting cancer. He's in a bad stage right now in his life, that he could come forward and tell the truth, speak truth to power. Donald Trump didn't like it, and he's already warned Donald Trump, hey, I could fight back, And so you may be in the next few weeks or months here having a tit for tat going on between Trump McCain, and I give McCain already the Bronze Star for that fight, because I think he will defeat Trump if it gets to being who's right about what our democratic ideals are all about.
Yeah, John McCain will be a formidable ally, no doubt, in that debate. Douglas Brinkley, Tim Naftali, thank you so much to both of you. It is now the top of the hour. I'm Brianna Keeler in for Brooke Baldwin. We're beginning with our breaking news. CNN is learning two senators, one Democrat, one Republican, say that they have reached a deal in principle on health care. Now, this time, Patty Murray, a Democrat, and Senator Lamar Alexander, a Republican, are reaching across the aisle. And their goal here is to stabilize Obamacare rather than, as the president has requested, just let it implode. During a news conference a short time ago, President Trump says that he actually endorses this deal, at least in the short term. Listen.
Apparently, Lamar Alexander has said he's made a deal with Senator Patty Murray to stabilize Obamacare. Has the White House been involved in those negotiations, and will you support that deal?
Yes, we have been involved, and this is a short-term deal because we think ultimately block grants going to the states is going to be the answer. That's a very good solution. We think it's going to not only save money, but give people much better health care with a very, very much smaller premium spike, and you look at what's gone on with that. Also much lower deductible so they can use it. Lamar has been working very, very hard with his colleagues on the other side, and Patty Murray is one of them in particular. And they're coming up, and they're fairly close to a short-term solution. The solution will be for about a year or 2 years, and it'll get us over this intermediate hump because we have, as you probably know, we either have the votes or we're very close to having the votes, and we will get the votes for having really the potential of having great health care in our country. So they are indeed working, but it is a short-term solution so that we don't have this very dangerous little period.
We're going to have more on that about face on healthcare from the president in just a moment, but we have some breaking news that I want to bring you right now. This has to do with a federal judge blocking travel ban 3.0, President Trump's new travel ban, just one day before it was to go into effect. I want to go to correspondent Jessica Schneider. She has the very latest on this. What's happened here, Jessica?
Brianna, it is deja vu all over again. It's travel ban 3.0. That is once again, as we saw in the two previous travel bans, this has been enjoined by a federal district court judge. This time the decision coming out of Hawaii. Now it's interesting. It's Judge Derek Watson, and Judge Watson was one of the judges as well back in March who also struck down the travel ban 2.0 executive order as unconstitutional. He stopped it from going into effect. So it's important to note that the president's travel ban was supposed to go into effect tomorrow. Now, this was the latest iteration of the travel ban. It pertained to 6 different countries, not all of them Muslim majority, as the administration pointed out. It also included Venezuela. Some government officials were actually banned because of this federal court ruling out of Hawaii. One thing I want to read from you from this opinion from the judge, he basically said that this third try at this executive order, it, quote, suffers from precisely the same maladies as its predecessor. It lacks sufficient findings that the entry of more than 150 million nationals from 6 specified countries would be detrimental to the interests of the United States. So the judge there saying that the administration has not proven that barring these people would help the situation in the United States. And he also said that the executive order, quote, plainly discriminates based on nationality in the manner that the Ninth Circuit has found antithetical to both Section 1152 and the founding principles of this nation. So, Brianna, just to reiterate, this is travel ban, the third version of it that was supposed to go into effect tomorrow. A judge, a federal district judge in Hawaii, has now ruled that this travel ban, it cannot go into effect, that it, at this point, he says it appears it is unconstitutional, and he has stopped it from going into effect. So once again, the administration's third try at this struck down by a federal court judge. Brianna?
All right, Jessica Schneider has the very latest on this. If you wouldn't mind standing by for me, I do want to bring in Jeff Toobin, our chief legal analyst, to talk to us about this. Jeff, what's your reaction?
Well, this is the continuing saga of the travel ban. What's interesting about this ruling is that Travel Ban 2 was supposed to be addressed by the Supreme Court this month, but the court dismissed that case because it was moot. Travel Ban 2 is no longer in effect. But what I think is almost certain now is that this ruling about Travel Ban 3 will be on a rocket ride to the Supreme Court, and we will get a resolution one way or another. I think each time the Trump administration has revised the travel ban, it has become more likely to be upheld. It is more narrowly tailored. There is a more explanation for the basis for it. Obviously, the federal district judge in Hawaii was not persuaded that this one was constitutional. But I think the Trump administration is in better shape defending Travel Ban 3 in the Supreme Court rather than the two earlier versions, and I expect they'll have the chance sooner rather than later.
Jeff, by the Supreme Court passing on Travel Ban 2.0 because 3.0 was going into effect or had been drafted and was going to go into effect, that wasn't the Supreme Court's way of signaling how it felt about 3.0, right? It's just the point was moot, and this has to go back through the process of being potentially challenged as it now has been by a lower court.
No, I don't think we should draw any conclusions about whether Travel Ban 3 will be upheld based on the dismissal of the case involving Travel Ban 2. That was just a procedural case in the Supreme Court. This is, but I do think the Trump administration probably has a better chance in the Supreme Court than it has, particularly in these courts in the Ninth Circuit court in the region covered by the Ninth Circuit, Hawaii and the West Coast of the United States, where most of these cases have originally come up, which tend to be the more liberal courts in the country. The Supreme Court is certainly more on the conservative side.
All right, stand by for me, Jeff, too. And I'm bringing Tim Naftali, presidential historian, back in with me. Okay, so this is quite some breaking news here, as we've learned that a federal judge in Hawaii, saying that the travel ban, the third attempt the Trump administration has made at it, that it is not constitutional, at least according to him. So Jeffrey Toobin telling us this is going to be on the express train to the Supreme Court now, Tim.
And Jeffrey would have a much better sense of what might happen there. But this is just a reminder to the president that there are three branches of government, and that at least the judiciary co-equal and the judiciary is pretty healthy. What I'm looking to see is how the president reacts. In the past, he has dropped the presidential demeanor and gone right after the courts when he hasn't gotten a response or a decision that he liked. So let's see what he does today. Best thing for him would just be to say nothing and just appeal it. But we never know with Donald Trump.
Well, that seems unlikely that he would do that, right? Considering what he has said about the courts in the past.
It's a shame. It's very important for every member of the triad, constitutional triad, to show respect for the other. It's part of the deal. You play in this game, you play in that sandbox, those are the rules. So if you're in Congress, if you're in the judiciary, if you're in the executive branch, you've got to show respect. It's necessary, and let's hope. Let's hope against hope that he does.
All right, we're going to continue to explore this in a moment. Tim Naftali, thank you so much for that. I wanted to go back to healthcare, though. The president endorsing a deal that has been agreed to, at least sort of the structure of a deal, you could say, between Democrats and Republicans, and extending those cost-sharing subsidies that provide many Americans health insurance, that help them pay for health insurance. The president endorsing that after just putting out an executive order that would have abolished those subsidies. So let's get to CNN congressional correspondent Phil Mattingly, who can help us with this, because this was something that the president by EO was going to eradicate, but that was obviously unpalatable to Democrats and Republicans on the Hill, Phil.
Yeah, on some level, kind of sparking talks that had actually, Brianna, have been ongoing for a number of weeks now between Senator Lamar Alexander, the top Republican on the Senate Health Committee, and Patty Murray, his Democratic counterpart who's from Washington. They had been negotiating on how to make CSRs basically come from Congress, how to make these subsidies to insurance companies that allow them to bring down premiums for individuals that are in the marketplaces come from Congress and not be subject to the executive branch, just for the reason that the president proved just a couple days ago, that he could cancel them. So here's what this deal actually entails right now. What Democrats Democrats want. They would get 2 years of funding for these subsidies, these cost-sharing reduction payments. They would also get a little bit north of $100 million in Obamacare outreach funding. So essentially the ability to try and more or less get people into the exchanges, let people know that enrollment is happening, those sorts of things. What Republicans would get, and Brianna, this is extremely important if this deal has any future whatsoever, is on the regulatory flexibility side. We heard a lot about this during the repeal and replace debate. We heard about this in kind of every iteration of it, from 1.0 to Graham Cassidy at the end. States want the ability to apply for waivers and get waivers from Obamacare related to tailoring their regulations to better serve kind of their constituents, their state customers. This has been particularly onerous in the past by design. Obamacare didn't want states to be able to opt out of a lot of the regulatory protections that are in the law that currently stand. What Republicans would basically get out of this is twofold. One, they would get kind of a change in how the measure of whether or not a plan is affordable is actually constructed. That would, in and of itself, would grant a lot of flexibility in terms of how the states could actually structure their plans. The other thing they would be able to do is it would speed up the waiver process, which right now a lot of states deem very, very onerous, and would also give other states the ability to almost mimic in the near term another waiver that another state has gotten. So say Alaska, which has a reinsurance program which allows them to take federal money and pay down premiums for others. Another state could get that almost immediately if they applied for it. So the regulatory piece is a very big deal if this has any future in a Republican-controlled Senate, obviously a Republican-controlled House as well. And for the Democrats, it's no secret. They want these CSRs, these subsidies. They want them funded. They want the Obamacare money as well. That would be what they would get out of the deal. The big question now is, where does this deal go from here? Has the president's endorsement? Obviously, it has two key Senate leaders' endorsement, but there are many steps left to go, Brianna.
Especially as it preserves a key part of Obamacare, despite the president saying Obamacare, as he sees it, is dead. All right, hang tight for us, Phil. We'll be back with you. I do want to talk more about the health care deal, including reaction from Republicans. Where are they on this? Next. Plus, President Trump claims the recent victory over ISIS in Raqqa was thanks to his changes in the military. Hear what Senator McCain had to say about that. I'll also get reaction from an Air Force lieutenant colonel. A big bipartisan agreement with potentially a solution to the end of, as the president had planned, subsidies to pay for health insurance for many Americans. This could lead to saving that for the next couple of years, at least, for a number of people. So joining me now to talk about it, we have senior politics reporter MJ Lee, CNN political commentator Mary Catherine Ham. She is a senior writer for The Federalist. All right, so this is pretty fascinating, MJ. And this was a discussion that was already in progress, but it seems like the president saying that he was going to get rid of these subsidies that help so many people pay for their health insurance spurred a discussion between Patty Murray, a Democrat, and Lamar Alexander, a Republican.
Yeah, sure. Alexander and Murray had actually been talking about, trying to reach some kind of bipartisan deal for months now. But Alexander ended up announcing when Graham Cassidy appeared to be going somewhere, this is now a couple of weeks ago, he said that these bipartisan talks had to go on hold. Now, when that Republican bill ended up not going anywhere because Republicans didn't end up having the votes, these talks sort of started up again. And, the way that this sort of played out at the White House today was pretty fascinating because it was literally within minutes that the president was bashing these CSR payments, saying that these payments line the pockets of insurance companies. It was during that time, sort of simultaneously, that this deal on Capitol Hill was announced. And then when the president was asked about this bipartisan deal, he appeared to endorse it, saying, well, this is a short-term solution. They have been working really hard. And I think, seeing how the president actually talks about this issue going forward is going to be really interesting and key to whether he is able to rally these Republicans, who many of whom are skeptical about supporting something like this, whether he ends up really sort of pulling his weight and talking to individual members and saying we need to vote on this so that it becomes law. Already we have a number of conservative Republicans who have said there's no way that I'm supporting something that basically props up Obamacare.
That's right, because this is not a done deal, as we heard Phil Mattingly just report, Mary Catherine. This could require some shepherding by the president.
Yeah, okay. So the upside of this is that it would be a constitutional way to do these payments. Before, there was no appropriation, there was no law, it was not in Obamacare, and a federal judge was like, nah, you can't really do it that way. There was an appeal in place by the Obama administration. The Trump administration said, no, we're not going to appeal that. This is not a good way to do this. So this would be a way to actually put it into law. Now, whether it succeeds is another issue. I'm not a huge fan of bailing out insurance companies to solve this problem anyway, which is what this does. These payments are to insurance companies, not to people who actually have trouble paying their premiums, and the idea is that it gets passed along. But yeah, I don't think that the president has a lot of ideological commitment to any position in the healthcare debate, and he's like, sure, go ahead and pay these guys if that's the deal that gets done. I don't think he has a huge issue with that.
Does he end up owning this then? What is, he calls it short term, but when I think short term, I think 3 months. This is a 2-year deal. So if this goes forward, Mary Catherine, may this end up being Trump care?
I think there's an element of that, although the extent to which Trump ends up owning anything is questionable, because he's so changeable and things don't seem to stick to him. As soon as he changes his mind, he's like, oh, declare victory and move on. So I think there is some question as to whether he's as politically affected by these things as other people are. But yeah, like I don't think he would mind getting a deal done, and that would be the deal that Trump got done. Ironically, the one that keeps this annoying part of Obamacare in place.
All right, let's talk now about, there's so much news going on this hour. It's a very fast-paced hour. So a federal judge has now blocked the travel ban 3.0, the third attempt at the travel ban. I want to bring in now Jamie Metzl. He's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. He used to be on the National Security Council during the Clinton administration. Okay, so react to this news that you have a federal judge in Hawaii, Jamie, who is saying, no, this isn't constitutional. He said the same thing about the second travel ban, and it seems like this is destined for the Supreme Court now.
It will, and we have this same problem, is we have a president who, as a candidate, was very clear about what he was doing and the intent and the goal, who's used all kinds of demagoguery and even racism in advancing this agenda. And then they rejigger it and say, well, we're not going to let North Koreans come into the United States, and there were no North Koreans even coming. And so it's not really fooling anybody. And I think that the federal judiciary is doing its job and holding the president to account.
What do you think, Mary Catherine?
Look, I think from the beginning of this process, there's something that the Trump administration could learn from it, which is that there is value in doing things in a thought-through, methodical way, and making sure that everybody has the notes about what you're going to do. And I think had they tried, for instance, perhaps this version on the first try, they would be a lot farther along in actually making a policy that might do some things that, by the way, the American people are okay with, some more vetting and making sure that we don't have folks from failed states coming beginning.
Yeah, and I think even months later, there's still talk about, this parallel universe in which the Trump administration had rolled out the first version of the travel ban in a more effective way, where it was clear how it would be implemented, exactly what would go into it. And, a lot of folks wondering if they had done it sort of right or in a more sort of advantageous or strategic way the first time, would the administration be dealing with the situation where they're now on version 3 and unclear what will happen to this, goal, this political goal that is very, very important to the president.
We've been seeing a war of words between President Trump and Senator John McCain. Senator McCain delivered really a thinly veiled and scathing speech last night, kind of excoriating very much, not just President Trump, but really his worldview. And then President Trump said that he had better be careful. He's been very nice, so sort of a threat back at Senator McCain. And then just moments ago, Senator McCain, CNN tracked him down the hallways there in the Capitol, and here's how he reacted.
Were you addressing the president or Bannon or the group in total?
I think that what is clear is what I was talking about is an environment here of non-productivity, of a reversion to the attitude of the 30s, which was one of the major reasons why we fought World War II.
So Jamie, when you hear that, and clearly, I mean, these are two gentlemen who see the world very differently, and they see the role of the United States in the world very differently. When you see John McCain seeing that warning against a return to isolationism that could lead to a world war, what do you think?
I think that we're in an incredibly dangerous moment for our country and the world. President Trump is taking a sledgehammer to a global world order that the United States spent 70 years meticulously building, and the peace and prosperity of the entire world rests upon that foundation. By saying that President Trump is going back to the isolationism of the 30s, was this period that led to the miscalculations and all of the problems that eventually left the world in ruins. And right now, what I think Senator McCain, who's an incredible American patriot, is trying to do is to make this the equivalent of 1954, when Joseph Welch and President Eisenhower said to Senator McCarthy at the end of 4 years of witch trials, this madness has to stop. And I think for this country and for the world, the madness of the Trump administration needs to be reined in.
Does this speech have that effect, Mary Catherine, especially as Senator McCain? I mean, it's a very it's a pretty scary warning what he's giving. He was saying last night, don't dismantle essentially the world that you have helped order, that you've helped organize. Right. But does it have any real effect?
Well, I'm probably between McCain and Trump on the idea of like American leadership and isolationism versus interventionism. But there's a part of this that I think, look, McCain's allowed to say what he can say because once somebody calls you a bad POW, go for it, right? You can fight that till the end of time. But there's a part of this where he says that this is unpatriotic to sort of be sold on this, he called it half-baked nationalism. But there's a part of this where an animating part of his party and the nation and crossover Democrats who voted for Trump really are skeptical of interventionism in the mold of the McCain style for good reason, because there were many, many deaths and treasure and blood lost in the Middle East, that people are very skeptical of that approach to things and being on the McCain end of that spectrum. So I think that's a political reality that McCain has to deal with as well. And using that word unpatriotic, I think, spread that beyond Trump and what he's selling to the people who adhere to something a little bit more isolationist.
But it's not just about interventionism. This post-war international order is part based on America playing this role of policeman. But it's
That's the part where I agree with McCain.
But it's in part based on the United States setting standards, whether through international law or international institutions, that create a foundation for global peace. And that is as much of what President Trump and this administration is destroying is about the failure to intervene or failures of intervention as the climate change agreement or the United Nations. All of these institutions that have kept the peace for so long are now fundamentally at threat.
Well, I and the folks who voted for Trump would argue that they actually haven't kept peace that well, and that something like the Iran deal basically gives license to Iran to become a nuclear power, and that that's not actually a great way to keep peace either. The question remains, what does the Trump doctrine, what is it, and what does it lead to?
And
better
can you
effects or not?
replace it with something better? I mean, certainly you can imagine it. Can this administration deliver?
All right, Jamie, Mary Catherine, MJ, thank you so much to all of you. Next, President Trump has thrust his chief of staff into a firestorm over his comments about fallen troops. I'll be getting reaction from an Air Force colonel, plus details on the investigation into the mission that led to the death of 4 U.S. soldiers in Niger. The U.S. military is launching an investigation into the deadly ambush of 4 U.S. soldiers, including 2 Green Berets, during an operation in the African nation of Niger, while the president is facing backlash, responding to a question about why he remained silent for 12 days on this topic and had not reached out to the families of the 4 soldiers. And here was his response today when he was asked about it on the radio.
Now, as far as other representatives, I don't know. I mean, you could ask General Kelly, did he get a call from Obama? You could ask other people. I don't know what Obama's policy was. I write letters and I also call, but I have called, I believe everybody, but certainly I'll use the word virtually everybody. But I really speak for myself. I'm not speaking for other people. I don't know what Bush did. I don't know what Obama did. You could find out easily what President Obama did. All you have to do is ask the military people. But I believe his policy was somewhat different than my policy. I can tell you my policy is I've called every one of them.
He did speak for those presidents yesterday, backpedaling there today on the radio. President Trump drawing one of America's highest profile Gold Star parents, the White House Chief of Staff John Kelly, into a debate about how presidents deal with the families of the fallen. I want to bring in David McKenzie, our CNN international correspondent. And David, while the response has been politicized, there are still so many unanswered questions surrounding the deaths of these soldiers. What are you hearing?
Well, Brianna, that's right. There will be an investigation and it's ongoing. What we know is that this event happened on the border regions of Niger in West Africa and Mali. And there was effectively an ambush of some 50 ISIS-affiliated fighters, according to U.S. officials, that descended upon these U.S. soldiers, the Green Berets, and the local soldiers from Niger. 4 American soldiers killed. One, in fact, had to be abandoned, was lost in the field of battle, and only more than a day later recovered that body with the help of French forces. Now, many viewers might not realize that they are, in fact, boots on the ground of American soldiers in that part of Africa, but in fact it's a growing presence. At first it was really an advise and assist and intelligence operation, but you're increasingly seeing, Brianna, US soldiers, particularly special forces, getting more involved in the fights against these militant groups. Now, while I say it was ISIS affiliated groups, there's a large presence of Al-Qaeda in the Sahara and the Sahel, and it's less important who is affiliated with whom, but rather that these small bands of militants can both strike Western interest and, in this case, US soldiers. It will lead to questions both politically and strategically what the US is doing in these regions and how those soldiers can be kept safe and be effective in their counterterrorism operations. Brianna?
That's right. No doubt advisors is what the U.S. government would label them as to get past that boots on the ground designation. David McKenzie, thank you so much for that report. Military operations in the city of Raqqa, but it comes at a very high price. This is what Raqqa looks like today in this exclusive drone video obtained by CNN. You can just see the devastation there after a months-long assault. Those U.S.-backed forces are clearing out the final pockets of resistance at this point in time, and this is a landmark moment in the decline of ISIS in the Middle East. A map here showing how little territory remains in ISIS control. And for this decline in territory, President Trump is taking credit. He says he has, quote, totally changed the military. Here's what he said.
I totally changed rules of engagement. I totally changed our military. I totally changed the attitudes of the military, and they have done a fantastic job. Yeah, ISIS is now giving up. They're giving up. They're raising their hands. They're walking off. Nobody's ever seen that before.
Why didn't that happen before?
Because you didn't have Trump as your president.
All right, for more on this, I want to bring in Nick Payton Walsh, CNN senior international correspondent. So give us some context here, Nick. What has changed between these two administrations, the Obama administration and now with President Trump in power? And can he really claim that everything is different now because of changes he's made?
It's so hard, really, to answer that question in a sort of clear fashion. We don't know exactly how the rules of engagement have been changed for US forces in Iraq and Syria. And, you know, there has been a lot of changes on the ground, a lot of advances made, but these are the results of a policy that was put in place by the Obama administration. An Obama administration plan to kick ISIS out. All of these moves, the strategy on the ground was in place before Trump came to the White House. So, yes, it's a bit rich, frankly, to suggest that all of this occurred because he became president. It was already underway. It may have happened a lot faster because he may have loosened exactly when airstrikes or artillery can be used against ISIS. And I have to say, looking at the latter stages of Mosul and certainly in the fight for Raqqa, there's been a hell of a lot of firepower being used. We don't know if that's because they've loosened up when they're allowed to fire, how close civilians are allowed to be, etc., etc. There have been hints that may be the case, often denied, but certainly we can't say there's been a brand new policy introduced by the Trump administration. That's simply not true. What we've seen today, though, staggeringly, is ISIS collapse pretty much in their main stronghold, the only real place they still held, their self-declared capital in Syria of Raqqa, massively symbolic. And in a matter of hours, frankly, we've seen them fall out of the hospital there in the centre, the stadium, the places where they plotted attacks against the West for years. They're no longer in control of those now at all. In fact, there are startling images of the Kurdish American-backed forces doing cartwheels, sort of somersaulting, spinning their armoured vehicles around squares where ISIS once held public executions. operations. It's over for them in Raqqa, no doubt, but a different threat now emerges. They will scatter as a kind of ragtag insurgency, some of them foreign fighters trying to get back home to launch terror attacks in the West, some of them staying in the deserts in Iraq and Syria, looking to see where they can get sympathy in the local population and continue their violent warfare there. And of course, ISIS will continue as well as an idea, a virus on the internet, inspiring the lonely, the disenfranchised, the deranged in the West to perhaps plough street in a mall area somewhere. So a lot certainly that would still be concerned about with ISIS, but today is a landmark moment. Those US-backed forces saying they finished major military operations in Raqqa. That was really the only major town that ISIS could claim it had a name to. They were on the back foot there for months. Now it's really over, and the caliphate, as ISIS once claimed they had, that stretch of territory between Iraq and Syria, that's gone. And that's an enormous moment here. It's not really Donald Trump's. Much of the work was put in place by Barack Obama and many of the military and diplomatic officers who've served through both those administrations. Maybe the rules of how they fought have changed slightly under Donald Trump, but frankly, this is a broader moment for the West and the United States to perhaps look at how their concerted efforts have really taken ISIS out as a territorial force in the Middle East. A bit of a messy future to come still, though, Brianna.
Great insight. Nick Peyton Walsh, who's been following the U.S. and its allies' assault on ISIS now for years. We do appreciate it. A career military officer is going to join me live in moments to discuss those claims by the president that he changed the military and ISIS is on the run because of him. We're going to fact check that. Stand by. ISIS has just been defeated in their self-proclaimed capital of Raqqa, and President Trump himself is claiming victory, adding that he is responsible for changing the military. Republican Senator John McCain just reacted to that.
Do you agree with
Glad
that?
to hear that. That's illuminating to me. I was involved in it throughout. Do I believe the last 8 years were failed? Absolutely. Absolutely. There was no rules of engagement, there was no success, there was no strategy. So I certainly agree that the last 8 years were an abysmal failure of our policies and strategy in Iraq and Afghanistan.
All right, Lieutenant Colonel Rick Francona with me now. That was pretty interesting, right, to hear Senator McCain say on two things. He takes the opportunity, of course, to take the swing at the Obama administration. He didn't feel that they had a good Syria strategy. But then, on the other hand, when asked about President Trump changing the military, he said, well, that's illuminating to me. I've been involved in it throughout. What did you think?
Yeah, it's interesting, especially the ongoing debate between Senator McCain and the president. So it's interesting that McCain took that approach. I have to say I'm going to give Donald Trump some credit for changing the rules of engagement. And as Nick went through quite detailed on what was happening, it's right, because what we had with President Obama was a deliberate approach to how we were going to defeat ISIS. The U.S.-led coalition was going to defeat ISIS. I think that was never in question. It was how long it was going to take. When Donald Trump came into office, and I get my information from the Air Force pilots who are actually conducting these missions, and they tell me that there was an easing of the restrictions that were placed on them by the Obama administrations. Now, it wasn't a complete lifting of the rules of engagement. They still had to follow the procedures, but they were able to react faster to emerging targets. They were able to drop more ordnance. They were able to drop it closer. But let's also remember that the Syrian Democratic Forces, the units we were supporting on the ground in Syria, got much better. We had been training them for a long time. So as they became more proficient, of course, it appeared that they were having more success, and we were able to conduct our missions, in a much better manner with them. So I'm going to give credit to both presidents.
On the changing of the rules of engagement,
yeah.
Is there a concern, because Nick Peyton Walsh just said one of the things that is rumored to have happened is rules about how far away civilians may be. Is there a concern that could actually create problems for the U.S., that there could be blowback from that, though?
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point, because what was happening, especially in Raqqa. Now, we saw this in Mosul, we saw it in Kobani, where a lot of the liberated areas were basically flattened and destroyed. There are no buildings in Raqqa that don't show signs of the struggle. So as the units got more bottled up into Raqqa, we stopped conducting airstrikes until the Kurds said, no, we still need additional air power. So we developed a coordination protocol where any airstrike within a certain distance of a Kurdish unit had to be authorized by the Kurds. So we did take that into consideration. For civilian casualties, we try to not have as many as to limit them as much as possible. But Brianna, you're dropping high explosives in very concentrated areas. It's just going to happen, and I think we took as much precaution as we could. But yes, that is a consideration. An excellent point.
All right, Colonel Rick Francona, thank you so much. And you were looking at video there from a drone overlooking Raqqa, so you can see the damage that is in effect today. It's really stunning, and this is what is left behind after the defeat of ISIS in Raqqa. Next, President Trump takes a dive on the Forbes list of the wealthiest Americans. An editor from the magazine joined me live to explain how Trump lost an estimated $600 million in just 1 year. Did you know that America's rich are getting even richer? However, the president is apparently not. You now have to scroll way down this Forbes list of the 400 richest Americans before you find Donald J. Trump. He dropped 92 slots from the year before to number 248 now, after his estimated net worth decreased by $600 million. It's now at $3.1 billion. And joining me now is Assistant Managing Editor of Wealth at Forbes, Carrie Dolan, to talk about this. So, Carrie, thanks for being on, and tell us why we're seeing this huge drop.
Sure. Yeah, the biggest reason for that $600 million drop you mentioned is the value of Trump's real estate assets in New York City. About $400 million of that $600 million drop is in the lower values for Trump Tower. He's got the lease for the Nike Town store, which is right there at the corner of 57th and 5th Avenue. That's dropped in value. A number of other properties in New York have dropped in value. Basically, retailers are suffering, even high-end retailers, because of the shift to e-commerce. More Amazon's winning, and brick and mortar retailers are losing out, and that affects real estate property values.
So I see how you can look at these physical assets and the real estate values and use that to get a figure, a pretty good figure. But without the president's tax returns, because he still won't release them, does it make it difficult to get the most reliable information, or is it more of an estimate?
Oh, we would love to see President Trump's tax returns. That would help us with information on any partnerships that he has that we may not know about, the kinds of returns he's getting, the profits he's making from various holdings. We are definitely estimating. We talk to tons and tons of real estate brokers who are super familiar with the properties, particularly in Manhattan. But at the end of the day, yes, we are estimating. We do know, though, for example, we have been in touch with Trump's finance people, and one of the assets that has dropped in value since last year is this hotel in Washington, D.C., the Trump International Hotel, which is not so far from the White House. And his finance people told us that he's taken on more debt since last year for that hotel, so that value dropped. And that's kind of harder news, harder facts than our estimates for the real estate in New York City.
Why is that? Why has it dropped? Because, we've seen a lot of stories in the past about how it's just booked up by people coming in, especially from out of the country. I checked it out last week, and it seemed to be doing pretty well, at least, eyeballing it. Not that necessarily means much. What's the reasoning?
Yeah, so it's definitely, the business is doing well. We're not saying that business is weak. It's purely that Trump has a $170 million construction loan, or a loan that he took out to complete construction. So when we talked to him and his finance people a year ago, so it would have been maybe August of 2016, they had not used that whole loan. They had a credit line that they'd only drawn down part of it, And when we checked in with them in February, we didn't get any more information because we also, it's a little bit confusing, but we have a list of the world's billionaires that comes out in March, and we updated Trump's net worth for that list, and we didn't get any information about the drawing down further on the credit line for the hotel there. But when our reporters did contact Trump's people, they did disclose that this $170 million had all been used, whereas a year ago they did not tell us. They said only 60 million of it had been used. So that's one other reason. Even though the hotel's doing well, the value, it's net worth. So we subtract the debt from any assets values.
Well, we'll see if they make it up with that $39 cocktail they have on the menu there. I will tell you. All right, Carrie Nolan.
Really?
Yes. Oh yes. Oh yes. Indeed, it was sort of eye popping.